Hello and welcome back. Happy end of May. How did we get here? I don't know. As you can see, I've arranged my bookshelves as a rainbow for Pride Month. I've wanted to do this for forever, and I just like this is a great excuse to do it. I also feel like so far it's been easier for me to find things than it was when they were alphabetized. So that's interesting. Anyway, today I'm going to be showing you all the books that I read in May. I had a really good reading month in May. I read a lot of great books. I read a lot of books. I owe that partially to the fact that I had a bunch of vacation time stored up and just decided to use it all this month because it runs out at the end of May, and if we don't use it, we lose it. So I used it, and I read a lot of books. So I think that's the best way to use vacation time. No? Do you agree? So we're going to take a look at all the books. I know I don't post on YouTube too often, so make sure to follow me on TikTok and Instagram at EasyCat. And if you enjoy my YouTube content, of course, make sure to like and subscribe. Hit the notification bell. That way you do know when I post. But in the meantime, let's jump in and take a look at the books that I read in May. Okay, so first up, I read City of Ghosts by Victoria Schwab. If you've been following me for any amount of time, you know that Victoria Schwab, V.E. Schwab, is my favorite author, so I was really excited to jump into this series. I only read the first book. I will probably try to finish the series either in June or possibly in July, but I really enjoyed it. It's a cute, like, middle grade ghost story. I really liked the characters. I really liked the story. I read it in a day. It was like a super fast read, but I think this would be a great book for any middle grade student, especially a lot of middle grade students do like stuff that's a little bit creepier. I mean, think about R.L. Stine, right? So if that's kind of their jam, I think they'll really enjoy City of Ghosts because it's like just a little bit creepy, but in like a really fun way. And I thought it was a really good book. I really enjoyed it. So City of Ghosts, there's 2 more books in the series. I already own them, so I'm going to, like I said, I'm going to try and read through them just because I'm slowly trying to have read everything that Victoria Schwab has ever put out. So this is like my slow working towards that. I've talked about this before, I typically don't love middle grade books. I even have another middle grade book in the pile that I thought was a really great book, but for me it felt a little too middle grade. This book, for some reason, I didn't feel that way. I think maybe because it was so short. Like, by the time I would have had any time to be like, oh, this is too kiddie or whatever, the book was over. So that's like the perfect length of it. Like, I don't know, I really enjoyed it. Definitely left on a cliffhanger, so I'm excited to see what happens next. Next up is a book that I know a lot of people are looking forward to. This is Realmbreaker by Victoria Aveyard. Now, this is my first read from Victoria Aveyard. I just can't, her name is hard. We're going to go on first name basis. Her name is Victoria. We are friends like that. I had never read the Red Queen series. I've heard mixed things about it. So I actually ended up buying this, but I did get an arc of the book as well, and that's how I read it. And I quite enjoyed it. I was very much in the mood for something very high fantasy when I stepped into this book, and that's exactly what I got. I think what's interesting is, there are like a lot of different perspectives, and we're dealing with like an immortal and a thief and a pirate, and there's all these like different characters. But because their storylines converge pretty early, it never felt like I was having to follow like a whole bunch of different storylines. I thought, as anything goes with a bunch of characters, some characters were more enjoyable than others, but overall it was a really interesting story. I at one point was listening partially to the audiobook because I was able to get it through my library, like right when the book came out, and I was like, oh, I want to try and finish it fast, so I was listening through audiobook. I found it really hard to follow on audiobook, and that may just be the nature of the high fantasy piece of it, but I did have to go back to the book because I listened to like 3 chapters and was like, I have no idea what's happening anymore. So I don't know if that was the audiobook's fault or if I just wasn't paying enough attention, but I did want to mention that. I feel like some audiobooks I can follow super easily. This was not one of them. And I think it's because there's just a ton of world building. So if you want like a high fantasy with a lot of world building and a lot of intricacy of the world, I think you really like Realmbreaker. I think if that's not your jam, you might not like it because it is a lot of like really heavy world building. I mean, some reviewers have compared this to Lord of the Rings. I would say this is, if I was going to compare it to Lord of the Rings, it would be like very light Lord of the Rings. But I could say like Lord of the Rings meets Six of Crows. This kind of has a lot of elements of both of them. More complex than Six of Crows, but definitely not as complex as Lord of the Rings. So if that sounds like something you want to check out, I think you should check it out because it was a really great first book for a new series. I really went a full 180 after that. I think I was like, okay, I need a break from fantasy. And I read It Had to Be You by Georgia Clark. Now, I'll be totally upfront. Georgia Clark actually sent me a copy of this book to read and review. And when I read the description, I was like, oh, okay, sure. That doesn't sound like something I normally read, but why not? Sometimes I like a cute rom-com. And to my pure absolute surprise and joy, I really liked this book. I thought it was quite lovely. It's essentially about this woman who owns a wedding planning company with her husband, and they're, executing a wedding, and it's going terribly. And then she finds out in the midst of all of this that her husband has died. And not only that, but he's left the company to both her and this woman he's like seeing on the side that she had no idea about. So chaos ensues. It also follows a lot of... I have a signed plate, and it's like falling out of the book. It also follows some of the other characters that are involved with their wedding planning, so it kind of branches off. It gave me kind of like Love Actually vibes. I know people either love or hate Love Actually. I love Love Actually, so if you like stuff like that, where you get to see a whole bunch of different characters and their stories, and they kind of like ping pong off of each other, and they're all connected in their little ways, this book definitely had that. But it all clicks really well together, and like the main stories I thought were really, really well done. So this was a pleasant surprise, and if you're looking for like a cute rom-com, Love Actually type story, but more wedding heavy than Christmas heavy, I would check out It Had to Be You. Okay, so next up is a book that I bought because I thought the cover was just adorable. I did buy it because of the cover, and that was Meet Cute Diary by Emery Lee. This is the story of a young trans boy who runs a blog, and on the blog, he puts stories of trans couples like meeting, like having their meet cute moment where they meet and then fall in love, and the whole idea is that it gives hope to other trans people that they can have that like movie magic love story. The only problem is he's making up all of these stories and posting them. So through a series of events, his family is moving, and he is going to be in Denver, I can't remember if it's Denver, but it's in Colorado for a little while. And so he's like getting to know the town, blah, blah, blah. And, he meets a boy that likes him, and they start hanging out. And in the midst of all of this, someone like a troll online outs his blog as being false. So he and this new friend, they basically start fake dating as a way to take pictures and be like, no, the blog is totally real, because look, we're one of the love stories, and here's some pictures of us and things like that. And then things go from there. I thought this book was very interesting. I don't know that it blew me away necessarily, simply because I feel like the main character just makes... I think especially as an adult, sometimes when you read young adult stories, the main character, like the decisions the main character made and the ways that he messed up were totally believable for a teenager, but as an adult, you sometimes look at those moments and go, like you're like pulling your hair out because you're like, why are you doing this? I kind of felt that way about this book at times, which again is not like necessarily a negative. It's more just like my life experience makes me annoyed when teenagers make really poor life choices that I can tell them are bad choices, but that's because I'm an adult and I've been there and I've done that. So there's that. I think the book brings up some really cool ideas, not ideas, but I just love the way that the book talked about pronouns and the importance of pronouns. And also one of the characters is like trying to figure out their pronouns. And I really liked seeing that. I don't know, I've only really seen that kind of tackled in a couple books. So it was cool to see it tackled in this book because I thought this book kind of took a fresh approach to like really being in that moment of seeing a character like, well, I want to try out these pronouns and maybe I want to try out these pronouns. And I really loved that the main character was just like, and always instantly supportive. Like, okay, those are your pronouns now. That's what I'm gonna call you. And I just thought that was great. I thought that was just great to see for young people. But yeah, I thought this was a great story. I think if you're looking for like trans representation, super, super cute story. I will say if you're an adult who enjoys reading young adult contemporary, which I do, you will find yourself oftentimes frustrated. But again, that's not a negative of the book. It's just more of a, depending on your life experience and how much you're willing to watch teenagers make really poor choices, this is one of those books where you'll be like, don't do that! Why are you doing that? Every so often. So just keep that in mind. But overall, I really enjoyed it. Okay, next up is a book that I feel like everybody loved, and I read it and I didn't love it. So that was Red Rising by Pierce Brown. I don't know. Everybody really liked this book. The way I described this when I was talking to my husband about why I didn't enjoy it necessarily, for one, I feel like, okay, so one thing is a big piece of this book is like a competition. Like while these characters are in this school to like learn how to be like soldiers, basically, they're they're in this like contest, but it's like a life or death contest. And I think I've talked about this on YouTube before. I'm so tired of the life or death contest like trope in books. I'm exhausted by it. Like as soon as I realized that's where the story was going, I was like, oh God, here we go. Like I was instantly not in it. There were some really interesting ideas presented in this book, but I think at the end of the day, my biggest thing with this book is just so much of it feels like it's a story about machismo and like I, described it as to my husband as like a certain body part measuring contest. Like that's what a lot of this book felt like to me. Just like who's like the tougher person. I don't know. I don't know. It just, I think when I read it, it's not like I read it and go, wow, this is a bad book. Why does anybody enjoy this? I think I read it and I say, I just don't think this is for me. Which is fine, right? I totally can understand why people enjoy it. And like I said, I think the writing is great. I think the world is interesting. I think the sci-fi elements and the class system are all interesting. I think the social points it's making are interesting. I just think for me, it was kind of a miss. So I don't know. You tell me in the comments, does the series get better? Does it change? Should I try one more book? I don't know. You guys let me know. All right, next up is The Luck of the Titanic. Oh, I'm sorry, just Luck of the Titanic by Stacey Lee. I really enjoy adding the to a lot of titles. I don't know why I do that, but I do it quite a bit. Okay, so this book starts out basically laying down the groundwork that 8 Chinese passengers were on the Titanic. Only 6 of them survived. So we actually watch Valera, this young lady here. So she is an acrobat, and she basically sneaks onto the Titanic to try and be back with her brother who's working on the Titanic. And in the midst of that, we like also meet all of his friends. What's interesting is that she was working for a woman that had a first class ticket. So she then used that ticket. So she ends up like basically stowing away in this first class room, but then going, down to third class to see her brother and his friends. So we do kind of get a glimpse of all of the different pieces of the Titanic. And, there's this whole story to kind of discover, what happened, what we don't really know very much about these Chinese men and, the Chinese people that were on the Titanic. So this story is like sort of trying to fill in the blanks of that. I think, if you like Titanic stories, I think you should absolutely read this. I also think this was a great read for AAPI month. I think for me, ultimately, what really stood out to me about this book is that this book sets out to tell like an untold tale, right? Like I'm gonna explain to you what I think happened, to these Chinese people that were on the Titanic. And it does bring up some really interesting points. They were really concerned about getting to America because America had the Chinese Exclusion Act at the time. And it brings up some historical points. But all in all, this book doesn't actually feel that different than every other Titanic story I've ever read. And I guess like at the end of the day, maybe that's just the nature of the Titanic. You can only do so much with that story, especially with the ending of the story being so like, okay, we know what's going to happen, right? Like we know where this is heading towards an iceberg, right? But it's in all its effort to be like an untold story, it felt almost too familiar. Like it felt very like, okay, like almost going through the motions of a Titanic story, which I didn't love. But what I will say I did love is I loved the characters. I loved kind of this original take. I loved the historical elements that had to do with them being Chinese and the issues that brought up at the time. I loved all of that. I just thought the actual like untold tale of passengers of the Titanic kind of fell a little flat. But overall, I think if you're I gave this a 4 out of 5. Like, if you like Titanic stories, I think you should definitely check it out. Just don't expect it to be like, it's not going to give you like a paradigm shift or a, wow, I just never thought that about the Titanic, right? Like, it's not going to be one of those moments where it changes your idea or perspective of the Titanic. It's going to give you some interesting historical relevance to Chinese people at this time of the Titanic, and it's going to give you another Titanic story. So if you're into that, you should check it out. Okay, so I don't usually put my graphic novel or manga reads into this video, but I did read a graphic novel this month that I think deserves to be here because anytime a graphic novel or a comic or even a manga elevates beyond their medium to just like a story I think you need to hear about, it's going to be in this video. And that is Displacement, which was by Kiku Hughes. So this graphic novel is about a young woman and her mom. They're in modern day. They're in San Francisco. They're trying to find out more about this young woman's grandmother. And in the midst of that, this mist basically carries this young woman back in time to the 1940s when Japanese Americans were being put into internment camps, and she now is going to live through that time of history, basically being displaced in time the way that Japanese Americans were displaced from their homes. This was just incredibly powerful. I feel like I learned an incredible amount from this book. It definitely opened the door to me wanting to learn more. It even has some great resources for continuing your learning of this subject. What I think this book did really well is it really talks about the idea that, a lot of this is not even covered in history class in school. And if it is, it's very minor, like it's barely touched upon. And, this young character, her name is also Kiku, I'm assuming this is like semi-autobiographical. She talks about how she's displaced in time. She's from the future. She should know what's going to happen to her. But she doesn't, because it was never learned about in school. It also talks about like the trauma of communities. And when communities go through something like this, they don't necessarily want to talk about it. It's hard for them to bring up to younger generations because that would entail them reliving through the trauma, and they kind of just want to leave it behind. This also discusses, Asian people being labeled the model minority and how that kind of came about from all of this. It just discusses so many interesting things, and it does it all really well, and it does it in a very accessible way. I just thought it was fantastic. So I highly recommend Displacement. Easily one of the best things that I read this month. So definitely check it out. So next up probably is the best thing I read this month. And that was Indivisible by Daniel Aleman. Oh, this book was out of this world good. Easily will be in my top 10 at the end of the year. I just thought it was so absolutely incredible. Essentially, this is the story about a young man who is gay, and he is just trying to deal with normal high school stuff. Like, he wants a boyfriend, he's working after school, he's taking care of his little sister, normal high school stuff, when ICE basically shows up and takes away his parents because they are illegal immigrants. And then, so now he has to, juggle his friendships and also taking care of his little sister and just dealing with this harsh reality of having, children and their parents separated, even though these parents have been, this whole family has been in America for so long. And, seeing how the court system just doesn't care. And Indivisible is frustrating because just seeing the lack of empathy and the lack of humanity, which is so real. It was a hard read, and I'm very much a speed reader. I love to sit down and read, but I often, I had to take breaks. I was reading this as well as listening to the audiobooks. When I was in my car driving for work, I was listening to the audiobook. There was a day where I had to just stop it and listen to music because I was so frustrated, and I was in traffic, and I was gripping the steering wheel. I was so angry, and I was like, I need to take a break. But man, it's so powerful. What I really love about this book, obviously everything that it talks about with deportation laws and illegal immigrants and things like that was incredibly powerful. But I love that this was a story about a gay character that wasn't about being gay. Him being gay was just part of his character, but his ultimate story was about all this other stuff. I feel like I want that. More and more and more I want that. I feel like we have so many stories about coming out, and I think those stories are still important. I'm not saying we shouldn't have them, but more and more I want stories like this, where it's a story about something else, and then the character just happens to be gay, and that, plays into their story. And this book was really, really powerful, really, really amazing, beautifully written, devastating at times, heartbreaking at times, but this is a book that will stay with me for a very long time, so I'm very glad that I read it, and I hope that you do too, because it was excellent. All right, so next up I read a book called How Lucky by Will Leitch. So this came from Book of the Month. I'm trying more and more to get through my Book of the Month books little by little, because I have a pretty big pile of them at this point, and I feel like they're oftentimes very good. I feel like Book of the Month does a great job of I am a Book of the Month rep, but this is not me trying to sell you Book of the Month. This is just me saying I was a Book of the Month member for 2 years before I ever started kind of working with them. And the reason I was a member is because I really enjoy, I feel like they pick good books, and this was definitely a really good book, a surprisingly good book. So this is the story of Daniel. Daniel, we see the whole story through his perspective. He has a debilitating disease that has him basically confined to a wheelchair. The only way he can talk is through a machine. But, you know, the book really tries to break down the stereotype that when you see people like that, you just immediately think that their brain is maybe also not at 100%, but his brain is fully functional. He's fully coherent, but it's just that his body is not in the same place as his brain. And he sees this young woman get into a car one morning. And then a couple days later, everybody's searching for her because she's gone missing. And he like has the information to try and, you know, he has information. And within this story, you see him kind of try to find a way to help this girl, but also you just kind of see him like living his life. His body's very fragile, so any little thing, any little stressor could potentially end his life. And it just was like, first of all, when the book starts, you don't even realize he has this disease. It actually takes a little bit of time before that's even brought into the discussion. So you meet this character as just completely like you meet this narrator not knowing anything about them other than the story they're starting to tell you, and then you bring into this element, this disability, and I just thought that was really powerful. I thought it had a really great effect on how the storytelling was done. The book is surprisingly funny. Like, despite like dealing with pretty dark things, the book manages to be very lighthearted, very hopeful, very inspirational, very educational. I just really enjoyed it. It was a very short read. Again, I think I read it in like a day or two. But everything about it, it just had a very lighthearted, this idea of, in the title, you can see how lucky, right? And it really approaches like what makes us lucky in our life, what makes you lucky or I lucky, and what can happen in our life to make us feel lucky or feel like we lucked out or feel like, you know, we accomplished something. And it was just a really beautiful, short and sweet, but fun and quirky story, and I would definitely recommend it. I feel like I have not read enough books that deal with different kinds of physical disabilities as a representation in the book. I've read a lot of books that deal with like mental health and things like that, but this was definitely a nice change of pace. And again, I walked away from this book feeling as if I'd learned a lot. It definitely was a conversation starter. If you're looking for something to read it with a book club, I think this would be great. That is not a hint, by the way. I know people watch these videos of mine, they're like, what's he gonna pick for the book club? I'm just saying, I would definitely only recommend this for adults, though. It definitely deals with a lot of adult content. I would not recommend this for kids or teens or anything like that. It is definitely an adult book, but I really liked it, so how lucky. I feel like we have a lot of books to go, and I am not talking fast enough, so let's go faster. Okay, so we have People We Meet on Vacation by Emily Henry. Really light, great vacation read, beach read. Well, it's by the author of Beach Read, so there you go. This deals with a woman and her like male friend. They've been friends forever, but there's definitely feelings there. And kind of dealing with them throughout different summers. And she helps with like a blog and like takes pictures of like vacation spots and stuff. So they get to go on a lot of free vacations, and you just see like their present and their past and everything that's led up. I will say, as far as like cute little rom-coms go, it is very predictable. But it was really cute. And like I said, if you're looking for like just a good, fun summer read, and if you liked Beach Read, which I loved, I would definitely recommend this. I did like Beach Read a little bit more, but Beach Read was about two writers. I mean, of course I'm going to like that a little bit more than a story about people going on vacation. But it was still really, really lovely, and I would definitely recommend it. Next up is a book that I would definitely recommend if you're looking for a good middle grade book. This is City Spies by James Ponti. Now, I know that a few of these are out now, I think 3 or 4. It's about basically orphans that get recruited to be like young spies. Really well put together story, really fun, like I said, really well written, very diverse cast, love that. For me, it did kind of fit into that whole of like feeling a little too middle grade for me, like anytime I'm reading a middle grade book and it just starts to feel a little too young for me, it kind of takes me out of the story. But I enjoyed this, and I thought, obviously it was a very, very fast read. But I really liked it, and like I said, I don't know that I loved it for me as just like one of my favorite books, but I would absolutely recommend this if you're looking for a good middle grade read, especially if you want something that's not just like fantasy. I feel like there's so much middle grade fantasy. And so much middle grade sci-fi, and this was a really great break from that. It was not middle grade or was not sci-fi or fantasy. It was like a spy story. I feel like there's not enough of those out there, so check out City Spies. I just reviewed this on TikTok when I'm posting this would be yesterday. So this is Rebelwing by Andrea Tang. This is about a young woman named Prue. She is basically like a book smuggler, which sounds like a really cool thing, in a futuristic sci-fi world where government control has like locked everything down. And through a series of events, she is like on the run and she meets this cybernetic dragon, and then she like mind meld bonds with it. Well, it turns out the dragon is like a research project owned by this group that's like trying to do some things, so she gets like pulled into them. It's okay. I mean, I love kaiju films. I love like monster movies. I love stuff like that. So I went into this like, oh, robotic dragon sounds so cool. Interestingly enough, I feel like the big flaw of this is the big flaw that I have with a lot of monster movies and a lot of kaiju films and Godzilla and things like this, which is that when it's about monsters and cybernetic things and robots fighting each other, it's really fun. But then when you get into the like characters, it falls flat. And I felt that way. I didn't love the character. There was not a single character that I really loved. The main character in particular, I mean, listen, there are a lot of whiny, angsty protagonists in the young adult space, right? And when you read enough young adult, you kind of just deal with that. But I mean, she was like exceptionally whiny, angsty to the point where, I mean, there were lines where I full rolled my eyes because I was just so tired of her nonsense. And that's not a good thing. So I would say that was a big complaint. I will also say the book does this thing where it adds, you know, a lot of books do this, where they add in like, there'll be like a break from the action to give you like a news report or a text log or whatever, like these little like breaks to give you kind of some extra detail, especially when the book is told, except this is not told in first person. This was not told in first person, but you know, to give you extra details of the world. There's so many of them, and they come at like, they just get obnoxious by the end. Like, I'm just like, oh my God, just get back to the story. They are clearly there to be just like info dumps, to just give you like tons of information about the world. Like, that's how the author chose to like world build, is through these news articles and things, which is not a bad idea. It's just that they're so frequent, or I felt like they were so frequent, that I didn't, by the end of the book, I was like, oh my God, can I just skip this? I just don't care. Like, and a lot of times they're even just like reporting on something that you maybe already knew happened. So they just felt redundant. I don't know. They did not do it for me. So overall, I did really like the world, and I really liked, you know, the overall story that the book was trying to go for. I just really didn't love the characters, and I really didn't love the format of having these like little news blurbs or text logs or things like that to info dump, like to give you information, because it got old very quickly, and there were, I feel like, a lot of them. So I gave Rebelwing a 3 out of 5. I will probably read the sequel because I am curious to see what happens next, but there for every good thing that this book did, I feel like it did at least one, if not two, things that I didn't love. So just keep that in mind if you're going to check out Rebelwing. I actually just finished this one today, so I'm excited to talk about it, even though I'm not sure I have necessarily got all my thoughts in order about it. I'm just going to try. So this is Hella. This is by David Gerrold. I believe this is the guy who came up with the Tribble. Yeah, he created the Tribbles for Star Trek. Random. So this is a story about a world that humans are colonizing, where everything is like really, really big. Like the plants are big and the animals are big, and it's like this terrifying big world. And we follow this young boy. He is, I don't think they ever say, I really tried to look back to see if they ever like mentioned this, but he's essentially on like the autism scale. Like he's definitely autistic in some way. And you kind of see the world through his eyes, and you see like the political alignments of people as they're trying to like figure out what they want to do next on this world. It also just really has some interesting ideas from a sci-fi perspective of like exploring gender. In this futuristic world, like people just kind of change back and forth in gender. Not like by the day, but like fairly often. Like, they often are changing back and forth through gender for various reasons. I thought that was really interesting. There were a lot of really interesting ideas in this book, and there was a lot of interesting sci-fi in this book. And I don't read a lot of sci-fi, but I felt like this was very palatable sci-fi. That being said, I think my only really big complaint about this book is I feel like the first half of the book is very world building and talking about how big this world is, and I just assumed that we would be seeing a lot. Like, I kind of wanted like the monster element, and by the second half of the book, that kind of goes away, and it becomes sort of like a sci-fi political thriller of of all these different moving parts and people trying to like gain control of the colony and things like that. And so the story kind of just went in a direction I didn't want it to go. I was like, oh, I don't know that I care about all of this. I really just wanted to see more monsters, which I didn't really get. And it gets a lot into like the personal relationships of the characters, which, don't get me wrong, they were interesting. And I really did like the narrator. I really liked the main character. I thought his, the way he perceived the world, especially being that he was somewhat autistic, the way he perceived the world and the way he looked at things, the way he looked at information, I really liked all of that. I thought it was great. I just wanted the story to be more about this big, scary world and not so much about the people living on it. I thought it was good. I would definitely check out the reviews. When I finished the book, I looked at the reviews on Goodreads, and the reviews are very mixed. And I can understand why. I think the book does some really great things. It has some really cool ideas, but I do think the first half of the book is like so info world buildy but to then go into the second half and have none of that world building really be used or pay off in the second half was kind of disappointing. I wanted more of that. I didn't pick up Hella about the big dinosaur with the big monster on the cover just to like hear about relationships I know this sounds shallow, but I wanted a monster story and I feel like I didn't get one. Sad. Last but not least, I just want to mention, this month I decided I wanted to restart reading Redwall. I actually think I only ever read the first one of these, so I'm reading them basically for the first time. So I read Redwall and Mossflower. I had initially intended to read these straight through to kind of just like binge them alongside whatever else I was reading. I might take a short break just because they do... Reading Mossflower right after Redwall, the format, like the formula of like the story was so similar. There were often times where I would get confused. I'd be like, wait, didn't we already do it? And then I'd be like, oh no, we did that in Redwall. The characters were different enough, but it definitely like followed like the same like, and now this, and like it kind of had that. But overall, I'm really enjoying these. These I think are considered middle grade, but they feel very epic and action packed. And I think the characters are really interesting and very original. And they're, I've kind of been listening to the audiobooks alongside them as well, because I was able to get the audiobooks from my library so I can listen to them while I read these. I will say the audiobooks are full voice cast. So the the narrator is actually Brian Jacques, which is really cool. Some of the cast members are a little loud and a little annoying. So I'll just say that, like, some of the voice acting is like, there are times where they'll start screeching and I'll have to like turn down the volume. I'll be like, whoa. But I am really enjoying these so far, and I'm going to pick up the next book in the series this week. I just might not start it for a couple weeks, especially because the first week of June, so many books are coming out, and I want to try and read as many of those as I can and review them. And obviously I'm going to be reading a lot of queer books and talking about a lot of queer books in June, because it's a great time to do that. And I read a lot of queer books anyway, so why not talk about them even more in June, right? But I am rereading Redwall, and I'm really enjoying it so far. So yeah, that's my Redwall journey so far. I'm 2 books in. Wow, I read a lot. I feel like this video is going to be 10 hours long, but I hope you enjoyed this. Feel free to let me know if you've read any of these books in the comments down below. Tomorrow, I will have my video announcing the book of the month for Easy Cats Book Club for June. I'm really excited about that. And then also tomorrow night, if you're watching this on May 31st, if you're not watching this on May 31st, then all of what I'm saying right now is not relevant. But tomorrow night, we're also going to have our discussion of the Infinity Courts, which was May's book of the month. So thank you so much for going on this journey with me, talking about all the books that I read. This was super fun. Let me know if you've read any of them. Of course, make sure to like and subscribe. And of course, as always, happy reading. I hope you have an awesome Pride Month and enjoy like just all the gay books this month. Have a great month. Happy reading.